Hello everyone. I don't have the fancy microphone and headphones or anything like that today, but I'm just coming at you today on my lunch break in my car, and I wanted to share some things that have been on my mind and my heart in the last few days. Right now, and I like to at least soak or understand or read as much as I can of a certain book of the Bible at a time. I'm not necessarily one of those people who say, hey, let's try to read this in a year. Let's try to read the whole Bible in a year so we can get it all done, so we know it all. But I just would like to just soak myself in a particular book or a particular thought or particular chapter or something like that. Just every day. So I think that's the kind of advice I would give for anyone asking me that kind of thing. How should I read the Bible or anything like that? But right now, I am in the book of Nehemiah, and it's one of my favorite books of the Bible because it portrays this amazing story of this man, Nehemiah, who is the cupbearer to the king. And if you know anything about ancient history, you know that the cupbearer was treated really well. He was the person who would taste the food and the drink before it would go to the king. So if it was poisonous, it would kill him. So you'd imagine that he is the last person to have access to the food and the drink that the king is about to eat or drink. So the king would treat him really well, if you know what I mean. Like, get to know him really well, make sure that he's okay, make sure he's well taken care of, has a nice home, has a nice place to stay, all the accommodations, because he wants him to be in a good mood at all times, and you can imagine why. So Nehemiah, this cupbearer for the king, goes to King Artaxerxes and says, I would like to go back to my homeland. See, a little bit of background is this. Jerusalem, the homeland of the Israelites back then, was destroyed by, foreign governments and regions and things like that. And that was as a result of God punishing the Israelites, and the Israelites had fallen away from them, all these kind of things. So Jerusalem was destroyed. Nehemiah was from Jerusalem, and he went to Artaxerxes and said, can I please go back to Jerusalem, and can I just simply rebuild it? You know, it burdens his heart. God had called him to rebuild this place for the glory of God once again. So one of the things, because they were good friends, Nehemiah and the king, and Nehemiah says to him, can I borrow some money? Can I take all these resources? Can I even take a letter from you and your seal, your signet ring, all these kind of things? So as I'm traveling, I can gain these resources. I can get what I need to be able to build these walls. And Nehemiah fully expected that he was essentially going to be alone in this. You see, back then, like I said before, the Jews were scattered. The Israelites were all over the place because they had been exiled from their homeland. And going to Jerusalem was kind of risky because, there are people that absolutely hated the Israelites. They wanted them to die. They wanted them to stay out of that land. But Nehemiah asked if he could do this. So he got the full blessing, the resources he needed, every signature that he needed to be able to do this, and then the blessing of everyone along the way. So he got to Jerusalem, started putting brick on top of brick, and you could imagine that, he felt discouraged, but something amazing happened. People started to come out of the woodwork. People of the heritage of the Israelites started to come and help, and everyone was helping each other fix their homes and their cultural homes and things like that. And it was amazing because this community, all of a sudden, because there was a mission and a purpose, came together for this particular purpose. And all of a sudden, 52 days later, everything was built to where it should be, and things were fortified once again. But it wasn't without its struggles. You see, Nehemiah came in thinking, essentially he was alone in doing this, and it was going to take forever if it ever got done. But he was being obedient to what God had asked him to do. Meanwhile, there were people that were coming to Nehemiah and everyone that was helping and just kind of essentially cussing them out, essentially telling them, we're going to bring some bigger folks over here and beat you guys up. We're going to send in armies to wipe you out. But Nehemiah was faithful, and the Israelite people were faithful to God during this time, and they believed that they knew exactly what God wanted and they were doing exactly what God wanted them to do. So, in our lives, God calls us into journeys. These journeys can be painful, they can be hard, they can be extremely difficult, something that we just dread even walking to in the first place. But sometimes God calls us into these journeys because He wants us to learn something. He wants us to be molded. He wants us to be guided, and He wants us to be built up stronger so that when we get on the other side of the journey, that we are much better for it, and we can assist and support others who are going through their journey. I think sometimes we forget that when there are bumps and roller coasters in our journey, that we are not called to just quit and give up, but we're really called to continue to work for the mission, to work for the purpose, to work for the calling, and God will provide the resource. And we have to believe that. As Christians, as followers of God, we have to understand that when God calls us into something, He will equip us, and He will resource us through those things that He's calling us to. And even though we face this adversity of people looking at us like, why are you doing this? Why are you going into this pain? Why are you allowing yourself? Why aren't you living for pleasure? Why aren't you living a pain-free life? And they'll even taunt us. They'll say, well, hasn't God promised you that if you follow Him, everything would be smooth? And by the way, He does not. But why would you even walk into this? Why would you allow yourself to be subject to this? But all the while, we have to remember that God is who He says He is, and He is faithful. So, Nehemiah had a choice to make. Was he going to go ahead and follow what God has asked him to do, or was he going to sit in the comfort of his own home, having a great job with great medical benefits and a lot of things at his disposal? Or was he going to walk into the journey that involved pain, involved some suffering, it involved some hardship, it involved some sweat, bleeding, and tears, but there was a blessing on the other side like he had never imagined. You see, what the end result of Nehemiah's obedience was his home back, was the blessing of God on this land. See, another thing happened. Nehemiah, also in the book of Nehemiah, realized that if God was not a part of this, if He was not the center of all of this, all these people with back-breaking labor and helping each other, if God was not at the center of this, then all of this was completely a waste of time. So we see in Nehemiah chapter 8, where everything kind of turns upside down culturally, because they had just stepped back and looked how proud are we that we did all these kind of things. But Nehemiah and Ezra also in this book looked and said, hey, listen, if God is not a part of this, if God is not the center of this, then all of this stuff doesn't really mean a whole lot. So we see that Ezra stood up, and he was the teacher at this moment, and he started to read about what God has done for the Israelite people, and he began to lead them in prayer, and this mass revival happened because of the sacrifices and all of that. And we see that God was brought in the midst of this, and the land and Jerusalem was truly blessed. So sometimes, just like I said here in the title of this particular video, sometimes the journey is the point. Are we allowing ourselves to be used by God so that we will walk into the journey, we will walk into the pain, we will trust Him through the trials and the tribulations? And if we're not, we have to ask ourselves as followers, what's keeping us, what's holding us back? Is it the comfort of money, or is it the comfort of our home? Is it the comfort of anything? Now, God gives us gifts for a purpose, and I do believe that, but how are we using these gifts that He's given us for His kingdom? So that's my word for today. The journey is sometimes the whole point.